Good morning and welcome to the first session in the EuroScience room of the EuroScience Open Forum 2020 in Trieste. I welcome you to a session on impact of COVID-19 on the career development of researchers. The COVID-19 pandemic has presented all of society with many challenges, but particularly early career researchers have been who have relatively precarious careers to start with, have been faced with many challenges. And this talk will include contributions from Dr. Katie Weed, who is the Head of Engagement and Policy at Vitae, who will present some survey results that Vitae carried out very early in the pandemic to assess the career impact of COVID-19 in the UK. Also, Sarah Piglia, who is the coordinator of the Working Group on Equality of Eurodoc, and who is a PhD candidate at the Sapienza University in Rome. We will also speak to Prof. Thomas Goudreau, who is the president of the Réseau National des Collèges Doctoraux, so the network of doctoral colleges in France, and coordinates an MSCA doctoral co-fund at the Université de Paris. And finally, we will speak with Dr. Tanja Vuskovic-Uroš, the editor-in-chief of the Croatian Sociological Review, who will talk about how COVID-19 crisis has exacerbated gender inequality in research. I would like to start off by introducing Dr. Katie Weed, and we are very pleased that she can talk about her work at Vitae.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brian, for that kind introduction. And hello and good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today. Here we go. So I just have a slide here giving a little bit of information about Vitae, which is the organisation I work for. I'm not going to give a long introduction, but our website's there if you haven't come across us before and you'd like to know some more. So we're a non-profit programme based in Cambridge in the UK, and we're focused on supporting the professional and career development of researchers. So I'll just start off with a little bit of context to set the scene of the data that I'm going to present today. So I'm going to share some data collected by the Student Mental Health Research Network, that's SMARTN, and Vitae, who surveyed doctoral and early career research staff in the UK. And this survey was launched on the 16th of April this year, which just to put that in context, that's 1 month since the start of the restrictions that closed, obviously, universities, research laboratories, libraries, schools, many other workplaces and social venues. And at the time of the survey in the UK, all but essential workers were instructed to stay home. So the aim of this survey was to give a UK level picture of what the impacts of that very severe lockdown would be on research work, on the mental well-being of researchers and their opportunities to have social connections. And so these initial findings were released on the 17th of May. So that just gives you an insight into the speed that the survey was released and also the short time scale that people were responding to it. So most of the responses were collected within the first week of the survey going live. So really at that very early stage where people were still coming to terms with and grappling with their new working environment and their new living environment. And so it very much focuses on the individual level, so the experiences of researchers themselves, and asks them about the kind of support that they were receiving, but also more specifically their perceptions of the support that they received. So whereas some things might have been available, it wouldn't be captured if the researchers themselves didn't know about it. And so the findings that I'll present were from 4,826 respondents. And in total, the survey through its time reached almost 6,000 respondents. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about those results, because I won't present everything that was found, there is a link there, or you can find it through the VTI website or the Smartum website. And I'll just acknowledge my colleagues. So the lead researchers of this study were Dr. Nicola Byron from King's College London from the Smartum Network, and Dr. Janet Metcalf from VTI. So I'll go through a few of those main findings just to give a flavour. And there were included in the survey a number of validated mental well-being scales. And so this first one being the short Warwick Edinburgh mental well-being scale. And what you can see here are the proportions of researchers giving a low, moderate or good assessment of their mental well-being. So low, which you can see is 45% there, that's indicative of a probable depression or anxiety. So this is not painting a very good picture early in the pandemic of the mental well-being of the researchers who responded. Only 26% saying that they have good mental well-being. And this wasn't a picture that fell equally across the respondents. So there were some predictive factors of better mental well-being. So the survey was completed both by research staff, so for example postdocs, and by doctoral researchers, so PhD candidates, who in the UK are students rather than staff. So if you were a member of research staff, you're more likely to report better mental well-being. Male respondents were also more likely to have better mental well-being. Those working in medical sciences as opposed to other disciplines, those reporting not having any disabilities or long-term health problems, and those who felt well supported by their university or had a good provision of online skills training in place of the face-to-face training that they might have had ordinarily. So what we can't say with this is that this level of poor mental well-being is directly caused by the pandemic, but we can certainly say that it's a concerning finding. And going alongside that, half of the respondents reported being very stressed about their work. 2/3 reported being worried about their future plans, and 70% reported being worried about their finances. So all in all, lots of really important things to know about researchers and their concerns, in particular at that time, but I'm sure to a certain extent ongoing. So there was another scale. This is the Kessler-6, which indicates levels of mental distress. And what we can see here is low scores are indicative of no mental distress. So that's quite a small proportion there at 22%. Moderate is indicative of moderate mental distress, or severe mental distress there at 22%. So 4 out of 5 researchers then are showing at least some level of mental distress. And again, this wasn't an equal picture across respondents. So there's some predictors there of a greater likelihood of experiencing mental distress. So in this case, again, doctoral researchers were more likely to be strongly impacted, females reporting high levels of distress than males, those working in arts and humanities also, those who reported disabilities or long-term health problems, but also in this case, respondents who were not a UK citizen. So all of the respondents are based in the UK for their research currently. And so those who are internationally mobile have come to other places to work or study, reported higher levels and more severe levels of mental distress than did UK citizens. And that might be indicative of having less established, local support networks, and potentially finding it more difficult to get the information and support that they needed through the pandemic. I don't think that we asked them how long they've been resident in the UK, but that might also have some implications. And again, if there wasn't a feeling of support there from line managers or clear guidelines from the university, that was also likely to be linked to more severe levels of distress. So we're looking now at the types of institutional support, and this shows the percentage who agreed or strongly agreed with the different statements here. And the one I particularly like to point you towards is the responses to deadlines and extensions, which you can see here. Alongside this, 40% of those employed as research staff reported that their research contract would end in 2020. And only 10% of that group reported that their funding or their contract had been extended in the context of the pandemic. So you can see there would be obvious concerns about the ability to complete the research and also the opportunity to find a new contract in what's a very difficult working and economic environment. And so again, you can see there, so this is split out by research staff and by doctoral researchers, and 29% of doctoral researchers reported that there was some possibility to extend their contract, but only 12% of final year doctoral researchers at this time reported that their institution had provided an option to extend their studies. So I'll just remind you there that this was taking place just in that very early lockdown period. So if we ask this now, the results may be improved. There's certainly been further announcements since this time from major funders in the UK and measures put in place by universities and research institutes. However, I think that there is still concerns and potentially different impacts for researchers at different stages in their funding cycle and in the kind of research that they're conducting. And going alongside this, universities in the UK have since started to move into programs of redundancies, and there are obvious funding challenges for the universities and particularly the smaller charity funders. So it really highlights that particular vulnerability of researchers who are on fixed term contracts and don't have that secure and continuing employment. I'd also like to note that there were some positives to be taken from the survey, and I think that's a really important thing to hold on to. And this slide, I think, is one of those positives. So this is looking at supervisor and line manager support and the percentage of respondents who agree or strongly agree with the statements there. And you can see relatively high levels of agreement that the support is in place from their line manager or supervisor, which is in contrast to the quite variable experience of the previous slide we looked at about that institution level support. I'll just give you a moment to take that in rather than read each of those findings out to you. So we're looking now at the negative impacts on different kinds of research activity. So this now is a percentage of respondents who reported a negative or a strongly negative impact on these different areas of work. And you can see there that, as you may expect, being able to carry on a literature review was slightly less impacted, though not completely so, particularly given that some researchers are needing access to physical resources for that, so libraries and archives, for example, or support from colleagues who then weren't being able to be in contact with. And I think that perhaps partly describes the difference that is seen there between doctoral and research staff. Data collection, as you might expect, was strongly impacted, and again, researchers are relying on many different kinds of scenarios for collecting that research, whether it's laboratory-based or field-based, or just having access to the kind of people and populations who would ordinarily take part in their research. What we did note was that 4 out of 5 respondents reported that they had the same access to a computer as they would usually have, so that's relatively good news. But 30% did report reduced or no access to the kinds of software that they need for their research. So again, all researchers will have had impacts, and potentially the kind of research that people are doing and the kind of facilities that they need would impact in different ways, and again, differently at different stages in a research project life cycle. Something else that was quite strongly impacted was being able to discuss ideas and findings with colleagues and peers. And again, this is something that may have improved over time. I think we've all, as this meeting shows, become familiar with connecting with each other online and being able to maintain those opportunities for discussion and sharing findings and so on. But I think that was perhaps less so at this very acute stage of transition to new ways of working. So this is the final snapshot of data I'd like to share, and that's looking at impact of caring responsibilities. So a quarter of respondents reported that they have caring responsibilities, and then of that quarter, 90% of them said that they'd had an increase in their caring responses since the lockdown, and 60% of those reported that that was a considerable increase. And that takes account of care settings, schools, and other similar environments closing down, at least for workers who were able to work from home. And 88% of those reporting a change in their caring responsibility also reported that that was having a negative impact on their ability to meet the needs of their work. And it's certainly something I can personally relate to, is that it's very difficult to hold a professional Zoom call with your little ones running around your feet and other distractions and needs to take care of family and others. So it's not surprising, but also concerning that a large segment of the researcher population therefore wouldn't be able to carry on with the kinds of things that would be normally expected to be getting on with. So just to close, I'd like to just leave a few questions as thinking points about what might be needed next, given what we now know about the impacts so far. And I should just note that this snapshot survey also has some agreement and overlap with other surveys. So we've also conducted a survey of more senior researchers and group leaders, and that was commissioned by the UK government's Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, so BEIS, who's responsible for research and innovation in the UK, and those findings will be out next week. So it will be interesting to know and to think about whether these experiences match the kinds of things that you're seeing in your own countries, but if you're not based in the UK and in your own institutions. And I think what we have to think about is how might we mitigate these potential mental health impacts, which I'm sure to an extent are carrying on. And I don't think that there is one right answer to this. I think this is probably a collection of measures and interventions needed to support both the crisis impacts and then potential future impacts. And then the big question, I think, is how can we best support those researchers who are in insecure employment? And again, I think this is not just one thing and is not a new problem by any means, but a problem that we've now got an opportunity to put a spotlight on and potentially use, harness this energy and enthusiasm to make some lasting changes in that area. And so to close, I'll just say that, again, thank you very much for the chance to speak to you all, and please do get in touch if you'd like to have some more specific information about those findings. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that very interesting talk on your survey results. Katie, I would now like to introduce our next speaker, who is Thomas Coudreau of the Réseau National des Collèges Doctoraux in France. And he is professor at the Université de Paris, where he coordinates Marie Curie Action's doctoral program. That Thomas was involved in negotiating costed extensions for PhD students in France with the French government. So please, Thomas.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Brian, for the introduction. Indeed, I will say a few words now on costed extensions for doctoral researchers in France after the lockdown. But first, to explain how things went, I'd like to describe a bit the French situation and how French doctoral studies take place. Just to give some rough idea, we have about 70,000 doctoral researchers which are registered, and among those, about 14,000 graduate every year. Okay, and they graduate, they are all registered in doctoral schools and in about 120 institutions, different institutions. And as for many things in France, things are quite homogenized and centralized, meaning that we have a 2016 regulation which follows earlier ones, which specifies many things, including the role of doctoral schools, who can supervise doctoral researchers, the composition of the defense jury, etc. Also, a 2009 regulation, which was revised, only in 2016, describes the work contract, which is signed by the doctoral fellows. Here, I will make the distinction between the doctoral researchers, which are all the what we could call also called PhD students, and a part of them are funded, have given funding for dedicated funding for their work research project, and these are that I will call the doctoral fellows. And each year, all doctoral schools are required to transmit to the ministry detailed data regarding new doctoral researchers, degrees awarded, etc. So we have a quite clear picture of ongoing PhDs, as well as more recently national surveys of career outcomes. A bit more precise things, because we'll be focusing on the extension of contracts. So 74% of first-year doctoral researchers have a dedicated funding, with very heterogeneous repartition between the different fields. For instance, almost all have a funding in physical sciences and engineering, a large proportion in life sciences and life sciences, and only 43% in social sciences and humanities, where a lot of professionals such as high school professors or psychologists, etc., do perform PhDs in parallel to their other activities. So the most common source of the funding is a 3-year contrat doctoral, so doctoral contract, which is regulated by the 2009 decree that I was mentioning earlier. And this is for about 34% of those who have a funding. So if you make the calculation, you have a total of currently about 15,000 doctoral researchers with such a contract. Those are all employed by public bodies like universities or research performing organizations. And most are funded by the French government, either directly through funding to universities or RPOs, or indirectly through research projects, which are decided at a national level, and then the money goes to university or to the RPO. And there is also naturally some EU funding, such as Marie Curie actions that we mentioned, or other H2020 actions, but also local, such as regional or town funding in some cases. So what happened when the COVID-19 arrived? Well, lockdown came on 13th of March, and the information arrived, and after 16th of March, it was not possible to access research labs except for essential workers, meaning some of the fellows, some of the researchers working indeed on COVID-19, which was naturally a small proportion. Hopefully, a month later, the Ministry of Research, Frédéric Vidal, announced the possibility of cost-paid extension. However, it's you can, if you read French, the ministry allowed the extension, if necessary, of these contracts, and naturally this led to a lot of questions of exactly how much money would be available. So we discussed between universities to give together a national framework of the different types of situations, and I really relate to what Cathy just said, where we found different type of issues that researchers found. Some had, let's say, a short impact on their research. I'm not mentioning a part which had no impact, but I'm only mentioning for researchers that where it had an impact. For short impacts, it was related to inadequate environment. It was relatively limited. The absence of computer was not a main issue, but naturally, if you have children to take care of, it's very difficult to work. Also, health issues related to COVID-19 either people who were sick or who took care of their kin, or also who were working in hospitals, because we had some PhD students which were in these conditions. And naturally, we had some fellows who had mental health issues, which was, as was mentioned earlier. And also no access to labs was an issue for some of them. Then we have people for which the impact was longer than the lockdown. Okay, this is the case where you could not do your field work or go to other labs because more or less access to other countries was closed. It was particularly the case for students, for PhD fellows, where they had very long international mobility, what we call co-tutelle, so meaning that the PhD is awarded both by a French institution and by a foreign one. And then we start going into partially destroyed experiments, and I will say a few words more in a moment. And finally, the last case for those medium impact was for fellows who had no access to their lab and for which they needed some restart time to set back up everything. For instance, in some cases, many personal protection equipment such as masks and gloves and were given to hospitals, and you needed to get them back. And so it took some time. It's a bit, it seems very mundane, but it's a real actual problem that was encountered by several researchers. And then you have very long impacts, very much exceeding the duration of the lockdown, which is found in the case of destroyed material. For instance, if you use mice or various animal models, if those are had to be killed during the lockdown, you need to breed them again, and it takes it may take a really long time. You have field work outside of the Schengen area, notably, where access to the field work is still difficult in many cases. And I'm not mentioning here some research which is taking place, which is seasonal. You have some research which has to take place outside during spring, and naturally, when spring is lost, well, you have to wait one more year to do your research. And also, one last possible long impact is the case of the use of large instruments such as particle accelerators, etc., where there is a scientific committee which orders the experiments, and if your turn is lost, then you have to apply again, and etc., and it may take a significant time. So this was some kind of frameworks that we discussed together to help us identify the various cases. And then on 17th of June, the government passed a law where, well, it required only the extensions, it funded only the extensions linked to the sanitary situation, not because of previous delays, naturally. It's only available for doctoral contracts which are funded by the government. So it's not for EU or local funds. And sometimes on a case-by-case basis for non-government organizations, for instance. Cathy mentioned the question of charities earlier on, and it's really an issue that we're encountering. And part of the law mentioned that the fact that the extensions were not counted in the maximal allowed duration of those work contracts, because in France we have some maximal duration, and you cannot remain temporary position for more than 6 years on a given project. So this was not counted. So it's passed as a law on June 16th. More details are given on June 26th. And after that, universities can start working to extend the contract. So how does it work? This was explained in the June 26 circulaire, mentioned that we have the doctoral fellow has to make the request before December 31st. I just mentioned here that this is true for doctoral fellows, but it is also true for other temporary research workers, including postdocs, but also technicians, etc. So I'm not mentioning that because I didn't participate in this, but this is also the same rules apply more or less. Then once the doctoral fellow has made his or her request, so he or she has to make a request in terms of months with a justification. Then we ask for the opinion of several people. first the supervisor, then the research unit director, then the doctoral school director, and then finally, after this, the opinions of these three people, we have the decision of the employer, which is usually the university president or the RPO president. Okay, so this was done, well, in July, basically, for all the doctoral contracts which ended in 2020. So this is what I'm going to describe. And this, you can imagine that collecting all this information in a very short period for a large number of fellows was a really lot of work. So the situations we encountered are the following. So first, I will give the more precise data in a moment, but the first thing which is important is a significant number of the doctoral researchers have found other solutions to extend their contract, either in lab funds, or we have in France several charities which address typically the extension of contracts, so which were able to help, and also we have also other temporary positions that some fellows found. This is true for the contracts that end in 2020. Naturally, this is not something that we can know in advance for those that will end in coming years. Okay, and also in all disciplines, as was also mentioned by Cathy, working at a distance proved sometimes difficult. And as I really related to Cathy's number, to Vetai's number regarding the difficulty to discuss ideas at a distance, which many people encountered, and this is something that we found. Also, sometimes we had some researchers whose supervisors were working in hospitals, and of course, these were not always available. Then coming in the different disciplines or the different sectors, in the life sciences, well, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of living material had been destroyed and needed to be cultivated again. In the physical sciences and engineering, it's more, well, experiments were stopped and had to be restarted. So it's relatively short, we'll see. And in the social sciences and humanities, well, it turns out that the delays and the impact can be relatively long, mostly because of field work, either in France, for instance, for people who work in education or psychology, etc., work in schools, their work impact was naturally very much impacted, or abroad, as I mentioned earlier, when you need to go to a faraway destination, right now it's extremely difficult, if not overall impossible. So what does this? What are the results? So here I give the results. So basically, we said that if you ask for a decision, an extension which is smaller than 9 months, so 8 months or less, there will be no decision at the university level. All the doctoral schools will be able to make the decisions if the required extension is smaller than 9 months. And actually, overall, over all the 225 doctoral researchers, we had only 2 who requested an extension longer than 2 months, than 9 months, I'm sorry. And these were for mental health issues. So here I will only discuss all the others. And the first thing that you have to note is the fact that about 40% require no extension. Okay, so either because they have found other funding, or because they have found other positions, or because they had already another position coming and they cannot extend their PhD. This is the case, for instance, in some for some medical students who have to take their position at the hospital right in November, so they cannot extend their contract. The second key figures I would like to stress is the fact that the long extensions are not in physical sciences and engineering, but rather in life sciences and social sciences and humanities. Okay, so as I mentioned, either destruction of lab material or destruction of or non-access to field work. And overall, if you make the average, you have an average request of 2.4 months. So this is the average of all the requests, including those that do not request an extension. with, again, a big difference between physical sciences and engineering, where the average request is 1.5 months, or 2.9 in social sciences and humanities and life sciences. So some comments. So it was very interesting for me to read all the comments and all the justifications for extensions. So, and I'm quite confident that the process ensures that demands are fair, quite homogeneous, and not exaggerated. It's important to see that both the ministries, the funders, they were really anxious that people would take this opportunity to ask for extra money. Okay, basically, just say, okay, let's ask. And really, I'm very confident that it's not the case. Again, we reviewed all individual requests, and this is what we really found. And it's really homogeneous between the different fields in most cases. It's also interesting that when we discuss with other French universities, because we all went through the same process, we have not made a detailed comparison, but just these figures really seem to be shared with other universities. We have had a quite stressful situation, naturally, because although the decision from the ministry came quite early, I said again at the end of April, we only asked for details, etc. In July. So for all that time, the doctoral researchers naturally were quite, although we were giving them news, they were still wondering what was going to happen, etc. So it was quite a stressful situation, which we could not do much about it. This funding, so right now we have extended the work contracts. The students, the fellows, will get their salaries, but this is done on university's budget. We still need to get the money from the government. Okay, so we hope the government will be true to its word, and because this has been a really big discussion in France on whether the government will really compensate all the impact. Just to give a typical figure, only for those contracts ending in 2020, for our university, it's about 1.3 million euros. Typically, it's more important to relate that to the number of fellows. It's typically 10% of our funding for doctoral fellows, meaning that if the ministry does not compensate, we'll have to diminish by 10% the number of fellows that we hire next year, and which, of course, we don't want to do. I don't have the figures for the moment because we have not done the surveys, but we expect that we might have some longer extension requests for first and second year doctoral researchers because the impact was indeed longer. As the PhD is 3 years long, a significant proportion of those at lockdown were already not done but had well advanced their research. So it's possible. And then there remains a big question of what about the other funders, including the EU. And with this, I am done, and I leave you the floor. Thank you very much.
Thomas, for that information about your work supporting doctoral candidates in France. I would now like to introduce Sarah Pilia, who is the coordinator of the Equality Working Group at Eurodoc, and she is PhD candidate at Sapienza University, and we are all looking forward to hearing from you.
Good morning. Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. And so here today I'm here to present the work done by EuroDoc in the last months to assess the impact on of COVID-19 on what I think the presentation has something wrong, but I think I have an issue with that. Wait a second. Oh, okay, perfect. I'm very sorry. Okay, so EuroDoc is a European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers. It was founded in 2002 and is joined at present by 28 national organizations of early career researchers across Europe. And we just work on promoting early career researchers' rights and cooperation across the European Union. And I can go on also without it, I think. Yeah, but I think it's maybe the wrong presentation. Maybe yes.
We've had some technical problems with Sarah Pilia's presentation, and we will come back to her afterwards. Now I would like to introduce Tanja Vušković-Juroš, who is the editor-in-chief of the Croatian Sociological Review, and she will talk about how the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated gender inequality.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm going to give you a very general outline of some of the issues related to gender disparities in academia that were exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis. So early during the lockdown, that was still in May, there was a tweet going around about how all the achievements that Newton did during his time quarantine from plague. So there were various responses to this tweet. One of those responses that I have put here on my slide, it's very good at encapsulating many concerns of one particular group of researchers, those with child care responsibilities, and it says, cool. I will taking care of my children when school are inevitably closed and then having to explain my decline in productivity in comparison to my male colleagues. So this was one of the concerns that many female academics had in face of these expectations that quarantine will create time for more work and more productivity. And indeed, really really soon after this tweet, the first reports from journal editors started coming in, and they reported they have noticed that indeed the number of submissions from female academics was much lower compared to male academics in comparison to the previous year. And this is pretty anecdotal now at the beginning of the lockdown, but we now have more data that supports this pattern. So, and this is something that affects mostly early career researcher, probably because there is a big overlap in the years of early stage career and the time when families have small children. So you can see that there is a gender gap in submissions to journals, and you can see that from data on preprint repositories, registered reports. You can see that from the journal reporting on their submissions, and you can see that from emerging meta-research that shows indeed there is less women submitting as sole authors, as first authors, and so forth. So this pattern, although more seen now in during this crisis, it's not a new pattern. The gender disparities, the gender gap has been noted now for many years, and it's usually seen in differences between male and female academics in number of publications, in international number of collaborations, those who are leading up to publications, and in number of citations, like scientific impact. And this kind of leads to this vicious cycle of academic disparities, gender disparities in academia, where you need one to get the other thing. So when you don't have a strong record or consistent record of quantifiable indicators of success, such as number of applications, etc., then it's more difficult to get tenure, and it's more difficult to get grants, and then when you don't have grants, it's more difficult to publish, it's more difficult to get tenure, so we go in cycles. And previously, so what has been known so far about why this gender gap exists? And the reasons are, of course, many and complex, from outright gender bias or discrimination towards those that are less easily identified or measured, including caregiving responsibilities of academics that are burdening over proportionally females. So these are the patterns that we know that are existing. So that early career female academics are disproportionately burdened by child responsibilities, and that has many consequences, including a motherhood penalty that leads to the higher rate of dropout from academia or slower advancement for many female academics. And so far, the way the academia deals with this problem, or attempting to deal with this problem, is limited in a way. It's mostly based only on eligibility extensions or on different kinds of stop the clock measures that kind of offset the problems with giving more time, for example, 6 months more or 8 months more or some other period of time is supposed to account for the period of maternal and parental leave. And we can talk about why is this a limited measure more later, but one thing I would like to just point out is looking at it very simply, even after 5 months of parental leave, there's caregiving responsibilities do not stop. They are then being done simultaneously with all other responsibilities. So actually the burden is even higher. So So as I said, these are existing patterns that were in effect, that were happening even before COVID-19. So, but what COVID-19 did was that it made these patterns much more noticeable, because all the work that had to be done, that was unpaid care work, was much more became a problem, and it was more difficult not to notice that this problem is falling mostly on women, as you can see from the data here about from UN policy brief and from American study of care responsibilities and work in home during the COVID-19 crisis. And you can also see this from this survey that was done about US and European principal investigators that clearly also support this pattern, that female scientists, especially those with young children, experience substantial and disproportional decline in research time. And this has consequences now, but it will have even more serious consequences in the future, because the track record that is not being done now is something that will be evaluated in future, when you have to give new grants, when you have to give new promotions, and then there is a concern that this will then lead to a much greater continued gender gap in future, when you will actually be sanctioning those who had the worst time in balancing family and other obligations during the COVID crisis. And I'm not going to read this whole quote. It's a very nice quote that kind of shows also how it is not, so even in the circumstances, how difficult it is to do actual research, not only for in the best situation, but how difficult that this is for when you don't have support, when you are, as in this case, a single mother doing fieldwork research in precarious temporary position with little support. So I'm going to skip this. We can come back to this later to see more, but we don't have time for this. So what are my conclusions? What did I want to say by talking about this? The concerns are immediate on how to try to help the situation and academics now, but concerns are also for the future, and we have to think about both, because the consequences of this period will be long term, even after we have done as best we could with this current situation. So right now, during the crisis, I think the way to go would be to prioritize people, and I think so. We could also see this from this earlier presentation about France, where you start with the concerns, will people take advantage of the extensions? And I think this is time not to think about people taking advantage, but it's time to think about people and how to help them in their precarious and vulnerable situations. So we start with this kind of thinking now, and moving on forward into the future, and thinking about how CVs, these individual relations, are often biased and flawed, and not taking really in full considerations the problem that people are affected during their careers, especially those who don't have traditional commercial careers and who have much other responsibilities that are making things difficult. We have to think what to do then in the future evaluations. And one of the movements that has already been happening in academia is this move to kind of move away from evaluating CVs and towards moving projects. So you don't look at number of applications so much. You don't look at number of all the other track record, which we know is flawed, and it's very difficult to evaluate it properly in times of crisis, such as COVID-19 and other crises. So you kind of go towards looking at the potential of the projects and the quality of projects. And there is some research indicating when this is done, that indeed quality projects that were not successful when done by women supervisors are more successful. So this was experimental research in Canada that was done that kind of shows this. And I think this is something that we have to think about going forward. So this is also connected to this second part. We all know this. We all talk about this the whole time, how the quantitative indicators are flawed and how impact numbers are problematic, and how you have to look at quality publication and not just where it's published. But still we use it constantly to evaluate, and we kind of create these vicious circles in which we are just moving forward, and we are constantly sanctioning people who do not have the best possible scenarios, the best possible contexts, and the most conventional careers. And going forward with this topic of gender inequalities and disproportional burden of childcare responsibilities, I think this has to also be taken care of in a more comprehensive way in our thinking about how the life academia is organized. So in thinking about how the stopping the tenure or just pure eligibility extensions measures are limited, we have to be more flexible in accommodating these responsibilities into our academic everyday life, from offline physical conferences that should offer childcare as routine, to virtual conference like this that have to think that you cannot have a conference that starts at 8:30 and ends at 7:30 in the evening if you have to go to the school, if you have to give your child a lunch, and things like that. So these are things that we have to think about it. And also, while thinking about all that remote work is offering us, we have to also keep in mind that remote work with children at home is not the same as remote work when you don't have constant distractions and constant obligations. So you have to think that flexibility coming from remote work is not really flexibility without accounting for all the inflexibilities that childcare or even more general child providers do have during their everyday lives. And I'm going to end with this, and we can talk more about this later in the discussions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tanya, for that very nice presentation and very interesting opinions and insights. And I would now like to welcome Sarah Bilia back after some technical glitches the last time. Okay, please, Sarah.
Okay, I'm back. Thank you for all technical help. So I'll try to skip the first part. So I'm here to represent EuroDoc, which is European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers. And so what I'm saying here is just the voice of 28 national organizations of early career researchers that were consulted during this period to try to understand what was happening across Europe. So the first question I would like to focus on is, who are the European early career researchers? Because, okay, under this acronym, we keep PhD candidates and PhD holders in initial stage of academic careers. But they fall under a very wide umbrella of different contracts and even legal status. So, for example, we saw that in France they are considered employee, but for example, in Italy they are not. They're just students, even if they benefit from unemployment benefits. So it's a very strange category of people with many different contracts. They have in common a high international mobility and desperate need to build a strong curriculum. So publish a lot, join conferences, networking, and all these things were impossible to be done in the last months. So the first thing we did when the pandemic broke out was to contact all the national organizations that were in contact directly with the early career researchers and try to understand which were the issues, the most present issues that they were experiencing in their everyday life. And we had the first focus on early career researchers with caring responsibilities that Tanya talked about just now, and early career researchers with disabilities, because in a context of pandemic, health issues became extremely important. And in the end, we highlighted 10 main concerns that were shared, let's say, they are shared by all early career researchers, and that are very consistent with all the previous presentations. So I think we are really representing well what's happening now. So as Other already said, we had issues with access to research resources and halt of mobility, of course. Also, the bureaucratic requirements of doctoral training were a big issue because they usually are quite not very flexible, let's say. And so at the beginning of the pandemic was really distressing for PhD candidates, not knowing if they could or how they could manage the impossibility to travel abroad, or also how could they defend their thesis while all universities were being shut down. On the doctoral candidate supervision, we had a very interesting pattern. I mean, we had two main groups. One was, neglected by the supervisors, especially because due to all the online courses, many professors were experiencing a lot of distress with technical issues, bureaucracy, and so they didn't have really the time to focus also on their PhD candidates, but only on students and online teaching. On the other hand, and it's something that was expressed also in KT data, there were many other supervisors that contacted a lot their candidates, so many emails, many phone calls, and also if this was meant to be helpful and supportive, sometimes generated more anxiety and stress. Of course, then we have why we started working on remote, the inadequacy of the working environment. We talk about kids and elders to be cared after, but today we saw I'm working with a very cheap computer that is good for writing, but not so good for joining online conferences. And this is also a part of the issue, but we can solve it. And of course, all these reflected in the decrease of productivity and an increase of precarity, because usually, early career researchers have short-term contracts. So we saw that in France, they organized very quickly a policy for but some others, many others, had a complete stop on their contract, and others had not paid extensions, which can be an issue, especially if you have a rent to pay, as the person cited by Tanya said. Moreover, all these happened on a background of an unclear future for research funding. A few weeks before the breaking out of the pandemic, we were petitioning to increase the Horizon Europe budget, and what will happen next is still to be understood. Of course, all these have a negative impact on career opportunities. Even if we're going to see this actually impact in the next months and next years, it's important to say that what is happening now is impacting the way we perceive our future. So it impacts the workload we put in our research, some choices, some life choices we are making, and this is actually already impacting our future career. We already said, we had issues also on mental health, which was a big, serious issue before the pandemic for early career researchers, and became really serious now because, of course, there was an increased isolation, increased anxiety. There is a lot of depression for the future. And so this is something that we should really care about. And then, of course, about equality, because all these impacted differently on different kinds of people. I will focus now on disability, especially, and socioeconomic situation, because now having a less than perfect health condition is something that really impacts the recruitment decision and the way you perceive your research. I mean, now it's something that you really have to think about if you want to do a work that requires traveling and be in contact with other people. And of course, as we said, if I get my contract stopped or not an unpaid extension, is very different if I own a house or if I have to pay a rent. So there's a very different impact on different people. And this is also true on all regions. There are regions in Europe that are poorer than others, universities that are less wealthy. And as Thomas said before, universities are paying themselves extensions, and some universities can, some others don't really can. So this is impacting differently across Europe and across different kind of people. Of course, there is a difference among scientific sectors. Now, people working on COVID-19 related research are maybe can feel safe, but this huge flow of funding is sometimes made by cutting funds from other sectors. And there is also a difference in types of research. I made a personal example. Me and a colleague of mine do quite the same topic, but she had to do 7 months of field work in China, and I'm working just on online materials. So, I mean, if this would have happened this year, I would have a really heavy advantage on her that recruiter in future should really care about. But okay, in Eurodoc, we are quite positive people, so we try to look what we can learn about this story. And so the first thing to do is to continue the assessment, so monitor the consequences on early career researchers' career development, the rate of dropping out of academia, because we fear that will increase in some, at least in some places, and on their mental health and well-being, which is something that matters to the whole scientific community. Yes. Okay, and then we need to assess properly and mind the research gap, as I said, taking into account differences in gender, health condition, and career stage. But also, it's important to say that all these issues were already there before. So this is a real occasion for enhance the research system, because now we all see the problems, we all feel that they're urgent, so we can't delay them anymore, and it's a good way to change what we need to be changed. So we need to improve contractual conditions to make early career researchers more secure in their work, enhance the mental health support, and stress cooperation versus competition. Early career researchers are immersed in a heavy competitive environment that increase stress, that also creates a lot of issues in the way we do research and in which we relate to one another. And of course, we need also to rethink supervision and mentoring strategies, because research is changing, and we need to train the trainers on how to guide their mentees in this new world we are building. And we should rethink PhD defense requirements, making them a bit more flexible, because this was an unexpected event, but it's not the only unexpected event we will face. So we need to be ready. And of course, we need to change research assessment criteria and methods, as also Tanya said before, because we need to include more people as possible. And that is the last thing, of course, we need to open up, because we can use this crisis to learn how to manage future ones. So we need to keep up research investment high, and not only on COVID-19, but in all fields, because we know which is this crisis is, but we don't know what the next one will be. So we need to be ready to prevent and to manage it if it's not possible to prevent it. Then we should speed up digitalization and open access, because okay, it's very useful if we need to close our libraries again, and but also to speed up, integrate more our scientific communication. And also because some things we were compelled to do in these months, like online conferencing, new ways of networking, etc., can really help people with disabilities, or people with kids or elders to care, that maybe can't move very often, but can join remotely and be part of the scientific community as all the others. So that's quite it. I mean, we have all the resources to change, and now we have also maybe the occasion. So just let's do it. This is the articles we wrote in these months, and that's all. Please feel free if you have any questions, and thanks for listening.
Thanks very, very much, Sarah, for a very, very interesting and inspiring talk. I would like to ask Katie a kind of a question directly from Sarah's talk, that what is the potential to change the research system to be more inclusive of all of the people who are suffering most from the impact of the COVID-19 crisis, which are the people who are normally in the normal run of the research world are most affected anyway. So people who have disabilities, caring responsibilities, and so on, because it seems to me that we need a kind of a deeper change in the research culture.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Sarah, for raising that question, and the suggestions that you already made about moving to making use of the online environment as one way to be more inclusive, although there are certainly challenges with that as well. If you have technology barriers, if you don't have stable internet or the equipment, but to dive then into the bigger question about researcher assessment and more inclusive and accessible career paths for academia. I mean, it's a huge question, and if I had a quick off the cuff answer for it, then it would be a much easier thing to solve. But I think what we're all well aware of is that it's really not an easy thing to solve, and there's not one possible solution. So research culture work from Wellcome and partners, for example, really highlights that there are systemic and embedded multiple systemic factors at play here, and no one organization or stakeholder group can really solve this. It's a multi-stakeholder problem, and Brian, we have a whole other session on Saturday together, which I hope people will join, where we've got even more chance to dig into factors around researcher assessment and responsible research and innovation and research culture, which are all intersecting to produce what I guess is a kind of perfect storm for researchers who are dependent on series of fixed-term contracts and series of project funding to be able to sustain an academic career. So I'm sorry that that's not really an answer. It's just a description of the different kinds of problems in this space. But I think the one positive to take is that we're all really tuned into the problem now, which hopefully will start to converge on multi-stakeholder solutions to it.
There was a quick question for Sarah that was, how can organizations get involved with Eurodoc? I will answer for Sarah. I guess you have a website with contact details, and it's eurodoc.net. And I would like to ask the next question to Thomas, that you described all of the work that you had to do with the French government to assess the situation, which for some other funding agencies that didn't assess the situation and didn't, because also the administrative burden of deciding who deserves a 1 month or a 4 month or a 6 month extension or a whole year of extension is quite large. That it seems that it took a lot of work on your part to engage the government, but also on the government's part to be open to a quite large administrative burden. Many of the other agencies, is it just that they didn't want an unquantifiable project or problem, and we're not open to engaging with the wider stakeholders?
Yes, when we discussed, for instance, with charities, indeed they were quite worried of how this would turn out, because it's really very difficult to assess that. And so my message is that with the circle, which I described, the successive evaluations by the doctoral researchers, his or her supervisor, etc., the research lab director, and the doctoral school director, we get something that is really robust. And what I'm doing right now is also trying to discuss with, for instance, the Île-de-France region, who is also discussing extensions of doctoral contracts, and to tell them, okay, well, they have decided on giving an average of 2.5 months, if I'm correct, or they're on the process of going in subsourcing. And really my message is don't give everybody the same thing, because it's not relevant. Also, it's really, as Sarah mentioned, relying on universities will make the fact that some researchers will get an extension and others will not. So it's really important that the charity funders engage. And my experience is really the fact that they're afraid of opening a Pandora box of and asking, if they ask the question, they are afraid, I think, of having an overwhelming request that they cannot handle. But my message again is that, well, now it turns out it's about a couple of months for France, on average between 2 and 3 months. So I think it will be more or less the same. I expect it to be the same for other countries, which is comparable with the lockdown duration. Mm-hmm. So it's not that bad. It's reasonable, it's quantifiable, and we can really discuss that. And so with funders who have not taken this step, do it.
And I have a question for Sarah, that for Tanya, that the crisis has most adversely affected those with caring responsibilities, particularly women. And how can the policymakers act to kind of counteract gender imbalance in general? Because they tend to deal with gender equality at evaluation and hiring better than they do during the general administration.
Yeah, but also these two things go together, because you start with everyday life, academia and science, and there you start accumulating this gap that then becomes bigger and quantifiable and then sanctioned at the level of evaluation and later assessments. So you need to, well, it's obvious, difficult problem, but I would say that you would need to have a change in a way of thinking about what a science is and what you need to look for in a scientist. And this is not just some automaton that produces most quickly and most quickly the data that you can easily evaluate and give 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. You have to think that the best science, excellent science, comes from diversity of profiles, ideas, and backgrounds. And to get that, you really need to have people who can bring this into academia, who can bring their different experiences, their failures as well, or their difficulties. And then you can really push forward and progress. And to get this, you have to think about a scientist as a whole person, not just the one little part that can be easily assessed with very simple indicators. So it's a change in a culture. And as Sarah says, this is the moment we can do it. This is our moment to do it.
I have a provocative question for Sarah from one of the audience members. And it's that why dropping out of academia would be an issue, considering that in reality, only 7% of current PhDs or postdocs will ever end up in academia. Shouldn't it be good if researchers think about moving out of academia sooner?
Okay, this is, yeah, it's a provocative question. Now, okay, what I fear personally is, okay, first that dropping out before finishing the PhD. So, and this is a big loss, I mean, for society, because having a PhD is something that, I mean, you know, things that then you can use in every environment. I mean, so it's a way of enriching society altogether. And also, I mean, 7% of current PhD finishing in academia, I think is a bit low in any case. I mean, it's already a problem now. Also because, okay, maybe, I mean, as also Katie said, we have big issues and it's not easy to answer all issues now just talking, but maybe we can give people the choice to stay in academia or dropping out, not just being forced to choose another career path.
So, thank you very much, Sarah, and to all of our other speakers for very insightful talks on this topic. I think we could talk forever. I think and discuss more. We do have another session on Saturday at midday, myself and Katie and other representatives from EuroDoc and other organizations, and on responsible research and innovation and open science and how they help researchers develop transferable skills. So with that, I would like to thank our audience for very many insightful questions, and we're looking forward to a very, very interesting ESOF conference going forward in the week.
Thank you.